Then we go county attorney, it's Nancy. Good, how are you? No, I second, go ahead. You quick test?
Hello, hello.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Good afternoon, San Miguel County. Today is Wednesday, June 25th, 2025. It is 12:05 p.m. This is a work session for the Board of County Commissioners. Present in the room are all three commissioners and a number of staff. This is actually part two of our meeting. We spent the earlier part of the day on a site visit to the San Miguel County Jail in Ilium. Per statute, a Colorado statute, it's the duty of the Board of County Commissioners to visit the jail at least once annually to examine it, its sufficiency and the management thereof, and to correct all irregularities and improprieties therein found. In my view, none were found. Seems to be in good working order, and the folks there are well cared for. So thank you to our sheriff's office and their team. We will begin now with a moment of silence for grounding and gratitude. Thank you. Review of the agenda. Anybody have any adjustments, additions, subtractions? Seeing none, we will move on to public comment for items not on the agenda. I will remind the public to please limit their comments to 3 minutes. If comments are not related to an item on the agenda, there will be no board response or action taken since the topic was not posted with proper notice, and any comment could potentially violate the Colorado open meetings law. No one in the room. Anybody online care to make a comment? Seeing no hands, we will move on to item 7, affordable housing updates. And I am excited to welcome Drea here, our fairly new San Miguel County housing specialist. We believe this is the first time you've presented to us in your role, although we've met.
Yeah. Thank you. I had to restart my laptop, so it might take me a moment to get back into where I need to be. Apologies about that.
That's all right. Jared, do you want to provide any background while Drea restarts her computer, or is she going to handle it all?
Well, I too am just appreciative that Drea is here. It's been about 3 months now, so she and I have been talking a little bit more about updating the commissioners on a regular basis on the activities that are going on. I know we have had kind of a weekly agenda item for affordable housing updates, and I know for the past year that has been kind of tag teamed by Mike and I. And so we were thinking of having Drea kind of pull together something monthly that is a little bit more substantive, not as off the cuff. If there's something that we can share off the cuff, we will continue that. But having a more substantive update on a monthly basis as just a regular course. So.
And then we would skip the more informal ones unless you want to bring it up under manager matters.
Correct. That's the big idea. Just again, we're always pressed to, oh well, we're working on this and this and this. But we think that maybe something a little more formal will be at least more valuable, hopefully to you commissioners and to the public.
So that's great. So today's the 4th Wednesday of the month. Why don't we stick to that schedule unless we need to adjust for whatever reason? Does that sound good? Yeah, that sounds great. All right. Thank you.
And did you get that pulled up, Dre, or you want me to project it? Because I could do that too.
I'm getting into Zoom now.
Aha.
Just a moment.
You have it right there. Why don't you go ahead, Jared, and it's easy enough.
I can do that. and pull it up. And then you can just tell me when you want to advance slides, Drea,
Oh, okay.
and we'll roll that way, if that works for you.
See.
All right. We've got view. We've got everything running here.
Drea, the presentation is up. You want to just
Okay.
work from there?
Yeah, let me switch back.
You can just go read through your notes.
All right, good afternoon, Commissioners. Drea Ariza, Housing Specialist. As Jared mentioned, I will be presenting the San Miguel County Affordable Housing Update. I'll be sharing these monthly updates moving forward to keep things on track. I'll hold space for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. So with that said, let's jump into it. Thank you. So quick overview on our grant. In January of 2025, the county was awarded a grant through the Department of Local Affairs for the Local Planning Capacity Grant Program. This grant enhances local government capacity through advanced affordable housing efforts, expedited development review and permitting, updated zoning regulations to support housing initiatives, and the county's participation with this grant has two key deliverables. One is hiring a housing specialist, which is for my position, and I started April 1st, as well as hiring a consultant to evaluate the land use code. Just an update on the timelines. Update on the timeline with the consultant. April 23rd, 2025 was when the RFP was issued. June 2nd, the consultant was selected. June 11th, the BOC approved that professional service agreement, and our project team, which consists of Jared, Kay, and I at the moment, had our project kickoff with Logan Simpson Monday of this week. And Jared will provide more details on that after my update.
I have a question. Is this grant money, did this come through Prop 123?
Correct.
Okay, because yeah.
All right. So moving on to project updates. We'll start with Ilium Housing Project. You'll see the project overview, which consists of the location, site, scope, and the current status. On the far right, you'll see where the site is and a recent project progress photo. So the county has contracted with KEO Studio Works to design and prepare the construction documents for 5 on-call affordable housing units at the Ilium site. Current progress is on early site planning and technical assessment for the Ilium housing project. Our current updates thus far consist of a preliminary site plan, which has been provided by Gulf, and we're currently reviewing that internally. We're planning to have a follow-up meeting with the project team later this week to review the architectural schematic design site plan. Moving forward with the timeline on that, the construction documents and permitting process to proceed with construction is slated for late fall of 2025, assuming we don't hit any roadblocks.
And I would just remind the commissioners that Mike and I had previously this spring met with the Ilium POA. So we're making sure that those design standards will meet the Ilium design review guidelines as well. That's a little bit of nuance that we have to take into consideration. And we do have to apply to that design review board to get an approval from design review, and then also our county land use procedures as well.
So can we just talk a little bit more about that timeline? So you mentioned that you would do, what would happen in the late fall? You would put in your construction drawings for
Yes, the permitting process to get things moving forward for an established project for our planning team to review that to move ahead.
Okay, and then when would we anticipate breaking ground?
I still think it's a bit early to determine that. We would want to be optimistic and aim for spring next year.
Why would that be optimistic?
Um,
A year from now.
yeah,
almost.
well, you just never know with consultants and third parties. We don't know what to expect right now, but we're hoping for the best.
And for that purposes, Commissioner Brown, I think that knowing we have to go through a process with Ilium, they meet monthly, knowing that we have to go through a planning commission exercise and a board of commissioner exercise before we can, and we may get responses where we need to amend design during this procedure. That's where I don't think we're going to be able to get a contractor on the case before next spring. And frankly, I'm hoping that we have all of our design approvals this year. That way we can go into, a December, January bid process for
Great.
that contractor.
Great.
And have them build a schedule. But so that's why I think we're trying to be realistic at the pace of things. We've seen building projects take 2 years, 3 years once they're in construction, and the design take a significant amount of time too.
Just remind me why this has to go to the planning commission and the BOCC? Is that for the lot line?
There is going to be an insubstantial PUD amendment that will have to take place as part of this. That's the lot line vacation process. And again, I think that's the planning commission process. And Kate, no, that's direct to Board of Commissioners.
Oh, she doesn't have a microphone.
Mike Drea. So an insubstantial subdivision or a subdivision exemption, which is the property line adjustment, and an insubstantial plat or PUD amendment. Both of those are one step to the Board of County Commissioners. There is not a planning commission step in there. There's only a planning commission step if it's a substantial PUD amendment.
I mean, and that would seem to me something we could be working on simultaneous to all of this, or do we have to wait for design and all that?
We could proceed with the lot line vacation, but in our conversation with the Ilium POA, they wanted to see some sort of design before they sign on for the lot line vacation, right?
Okay.
So there may be ways we can work and we can continue to explore that, but I think we're giving you the longest time frame, with some measure of optimism, but something that we think we can actually hit.
Yeah.
We hope to do better, right? We hope we can run a little faster than this, but we don't want to give expectations that won't be met. So.
Thank you, Jared.
I appreciate that.
All right, moving on to.
I'm sorry, I appreciate that as well, but I would like to hear that spring of 2026 is our goal for breaking ground. Like, I think we have to set goals in order to achieve things. I mean, part of it is just like working towards a time, and I think it's easy to just say, well, move along as quickly as we can, but I think we need to have a goal. And if that's not realistic, let's set what is realistic, but I don't think we should just kind of go along without those markers that we're trying to hit. Does that feel realistic to break ground in the spring of 26? Or is it optimistic?
I think it's a realistic goal that we can strive for sure. I think we can say full mouth, yes, our goal is to break ground spring. I'd say April, May 2026, to have a contractor in place. That way we can proceed. So.
That feels better. Thank you.
And backing up one step, does it seem realistic to set a goal for getting a contractor, putting out bid for contractors in December or January, because everything is gonna revolve around that.
I believe so. If we, we're working with Jim Keough actively now. I think we have, as Drea mentioned, some architectural review later this week. I think the pieces are coming together. We've given him the design guidelines that should be met with those designs. And so I do believe that we have the right pace to hit those marks in the fall. That way we can have a bid over winter and get a contractor that hopefully is wanting to pitch at the project. We've heard some contractors actually interested if this is a modular approach, which we're trying to integrate as well. And so we are really hopeful that there's also interest because we've already heard a little bit of it. So
That's great.
okay.
All right, moving on to the next project, Deer Creek. You'll see above project overview, which consists of the location, site, scope, current status. On the right, you'll see a picture of the county parcel as well as the CDOT owned parcel. So this project, the county is partnering with CDOT through a workforce housing planning agreement that establishes a framework for collaboration on a potential housing project. This agreement outlines potential construction of necessary infrastructure and residential housing on the proposed site. If both parties determine that this project is viable, they will in good faith enter into an affordable housing development agreement. That future agreement could consist of the terms of the developing housing units, allocation of the units between the county and CDOT, resident qualification criteria, and roles and responsibilities of each party. Current accomplishments, Jared and I drafted the workforce housing planning agreement, excuse me. And then we met with the CDOT team on June 10th to discuss that. We made some revisions. It's currently with CDOT to review with their controller and get back with us. They did tell us that it could take a couple of months just because they are busy. So that is on our radar to do some follow-up. I would like to note that the term of the agreement right now is proposed to not exceed past December 31st, 2026. That timeline could be adjusted depending on finalizing that agreement. When we do move forward with that, we will come back and present that to the BOCC for review and execution at a later date.
And just for those purposes, to make sure it's clear for the commissioners here, this design agreement with CDOT, we will engage once their controller signs off, and that's kind of our current stumbling block right now. The folks we've been working with at CDOT said, the document looks great. I've seen the controller sign off on it pretty quick before, but I've also seen them sit on it a bit, depending on their workload. And so when we get that done, we'll immediately go into a procurement process for a designer, unless we want to use Jim Keough and extend his design contract to cover this piece of work as well. And so that's one decision point we'll have in the future. And that design contract, to Drea's point, goes through with CDOT through December of 2026. Ultimately that design will come up with an 80% plan and a cost estimate. And that is going to be a scenario where CDOT will sit and say, and they've actually already admitted to us, they may want us to break this project into pieces a little bit. That way, if their money is tied up on other projects around the state, that they aren't holding us up and vice versa. So we're going to be trying to think of how to modularize that project. But at the same time, we're going to have water sewer for the whole thing out of the gate. So that's going to be one of our big considerations as we keep moving. So.
Can you just remind me where on this map, or that you're showing us, the housing would be? At one point it was gonna be downstream, now I think it's upstream.
Yeah, so our original designs had it, and if you can see my mouse, I don't know if it's displaying. Actually, I have these sweet tools. The original design had it kind of in this neck of the woods. And with a little bit on these edges, and that was before CDOT kind of engaged. They kind of came and they said, "Hey, we see you guys are looking at this. We've actually been positioning how we would put modular boxes on our site. Why don't we join forces and make it more meaningful?" So with that, we kind of switched gears, and now the idea is to locate their operations assets. So their garage, their salt shed, their mag chloride containment area, all of that onto our county parcel. And we'll have to execute an operations agreement with them on sharing that site, even though we'll continue to have ownership. And then having the housing go on this whole parcel when it, which will ultimately give us a blank slate. Once we're able to relocate their assets to our site, we can remove everything on that site, add whatever additional kind of berming or we did talk about some good screening between the two parcels. That'll be desirable if you work right where you live. You want a little bit of separation, but that'll be kind of a blank area that we can hopefully maximize our efforts on.
Nice. And I had noticed that you're planning, or the current scope is 20 to 25 units. And previously, obviously, it was very preliminary.
Yeah.
We had estimated 18 to 40. Do you feel like you're honing in on a more realistic number? Or we don't know yet?
We don't know yet. I'm think that we were talking 30 to 35 for the most part.
Okay.
It depends on what we can do with water, because there is an available well on site from CDOT that we may be able to augment for indoor use. But again, those are some of the factors: our water supply, what size of wastewater system we will have to design. As we know, we may have a wastewater treatment plant neighbor in the future, but if we want this to move ahead of that project, we're going to have a solution there before that gets constructed, right? So there's a lot of sequencing that will be part of this. But my hope is really 30, 35 units. I think that's reasonable considering the preliminary designs that we've identified. And CDOT has expressed their desire for anywhere from 3 to 5 units for themselves, which seems kind of like a reasonable break. All the finances of these projects will end up being hammered out once we have a better picture of all of it. And so that'll be one of those things. If they only have 4 or 5 units, we hope to make a pod or something that they could engage in construction on while we pursue, a more robust construction. So, other questions? Okay.
But the details as far as the finances haven't even begun to be bridged with CDOT at all?
No.
Okay.
No, that is part of this phase, is actually getting an engineer's estimate of construction. And that's the point where we can actually start talking about, if it was to be 30 units, what's the cost per unit? How much would CDOT have to put in? How much would we have to put in? How can we phase it or modularize it in where we might be able to do, a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, something like that. So that is all down the road, and we expect to be really in the middle of those conversations before next December, hopefully, with our current schedule that's outlined with CDOT.
And I just one other question, because I'm not super up to speed with
Yeah.
this project. is there any sort of preliminary agreement with CDOT as far as the utilization of their land and moving their laydown operations over to county land and how that's gonna shake out financially for this project? Is it just gonna be like a straight kind of like good faith swap or what? What's
So
the deal?
there will be an agreement, and we've been talking with David Fox, who's the land person for CDOT. And he's been explaining that we're not doing something that hasn't been tried around the state in other areas. And so we were discussing how we would trade pretty much leases with each other, 99-year leases, for some value, be it that we have their operations on our site, and then we have use of the housing site for those same 99 years, so on and so forth. And there have been conversations, but again, since the numbers are preliminary and we don't have the cost of anything, of how we may be trading value for those things as well. So it's still very murky because we don't have actual numbers, but he's assured us they've done this model in Frisco, they've done this model in Fairplay. They are working on one, I believe, in Avon, if I recall correctly. So they're starting to engage in these kind of agreements with local governments around the state in recognition of their housing needs to staff their various CDOT locations. So,
Thanks for that.
yeah.
I know it'll be a work in progress, but it's helpful.
All right, next one.
All right, moving on to Pathfinder. So this one is for a proposed site of 73 units. It's in progress, coordinating with San Bernardo HOA to finalize an MOU for the well testing site. Once that's finalized, I will begin supporting Mike and Jared on this as they've been leading the efforts to date on this. So was there anything else you wanted to share on that note, Jared?
I think positive progress. Mike and I both had a meeting with Jeff Haskell,
president of our HOA,
this week, and hammered out a few terms that have continued to elude us collectively. To Jeff's credit, he did express that they really do want to proceed with the testing. It's just a matter of having the security that they aren't going to have a big bill at the end of the day. And so we're working through that with them to make sure that we're protecting our assets and our investments, but also not expecting them to, cover 100% of those costs if we don't end up getting to a place where we can work together. So that's really the sticking point that has eluded us. We had a really great meeting. Mike and I have been working on a couple of amendments to our previous MOU form to try and address those concerns for Jeff and the rest of his board members. And we're going to be sharing that back. I think by Friday was our delivery date for them. Once we get that done, I believe Wright Water Engineers, we just need to update a contract and then sign off, and they can conduct the well testing. It's just a matter, at that point in time, it's just going to be a matter of mobilizing a drill rig to the site to conduct those tests. So we're still on track to be able to move on this this summer with the well testing and really identify if working with San Bernardo is going to be our best opportunity for a water supply for this location. And at the same time, we do continue to do monitoring as needed for our wastewater permitting process that Wright Water Engineering is also engaged in. So,
and I met with Wright Water yesterday afternoon, and they're supplying us some data to help further ease this initial term MOU with San Bernardo.
Say that again?
Basically, I am asked Jonah Howe at Right Water to evaluate what San Bernardo's costs would have to be regardless of whether or not they chose to work with the county to bring on their backup water supply, which they currently don't have.
And not that I don't expect that we'll be able to work things out with San Bernardo, but if for some reason that doesn't work, what's our backup plan for water?
That's it.
We have Right Water engineers ready to explore surface supply water. Again, there would be a water court procedure we would have to go through for that. We'd have to test for availability. And there are a few more strings attached with treatment of surface supply versus a well supplied water. But they have identified potential available rights to use for that. So,
As well as the potential of working with the Forest Service on their property for a well, using our water rights that we have.
Okay.
Jared, or rather, Andrea, does the 73 community housing units that we're listing as the potential scope include the possibility of a Forest Service trade, or is that's the 73 excluding that possibility?
That is excluding if we're successful in acquiring land adjacent from the Forest Service, we would be able to add an additional pod. And I forget offhand, but I think it was in the neighborhood of 12 additional homes.
Thank you.
And is design moving forward? Are we moving forward on that, or is that paused with Jim Keough?
that's effectively paused right now because we don't want to design something that we don't have water resources identified for. And that's why one of our first steps always is what water and sewer is available. As we know, I think I've said it a few times. One of the benefits, one of the reasons that we've continued to partner with our partners in Mountain Village, town of Telluride, town of Norwood for their part, is because that infrastructure is already in place. And that really does change both the speed and the availability to pursue any of these projects. So I think we've always got to keep our eye out for opportunities to continue those partnerships, because those are always going to be both faster and probably easier to execute than these, building from scratch a community kind of process. So.
All right, so moving on to our housing needs assessment report update. June 2nd, the final report was received from EPS. Next steps include a joint meeting, which is scheduled for July 7th, 1 p.m. That's going to be our monthly meeting with SMRHA. Via Zoom. So we'll begin the presentation of the housing needs assessment report, followed by a Q&A session. Additional agenda items will follow. And there is a press release that is now available on the San Miguel County's website. Just wanted to talk about next step of what this means for the county. So this, just to recap, the housing needs assessment report came out of a requirement from Senate Bill 24-174, which was the Sustainability Affordable Housing Assistance Bill. So the focus of addressing housing needs in Colorado, requiring certain jurisdictions, and I believe that was a population over 1,000, to complete local housing need assessment reports, as well as a housing action plan, and to update their comprehensive plans with new elements related to water supply and strategic growth. So a housing action plan requires that it be adopted, jurisdictions adopt it by January 1st of 2028, and it must be updated every 6 years, and to submit progress reports to DOLA every 3 years after adoption. So before the county can develop a housing action plan, we will first need to complete our code audit in partnership with Logan Simpson. This process will help inform and guide the creation of a meaningful and actionable housing action plan. Any questions on this slide? Okay.
I have one question. Through our intergovernmental meetings, we've talked about 3 priorities that the all of the local jurisdictions would work on together, and one of those is housing. Is there an opportunity to have a housing action plan that is regional, or does this need to be by jurisdiction?
And I will take that one. I have had a couple conversations with representatives from the town of Telluride and from the town of Mountain Village in particular. And I think that we are all in such different scenarios with what we can and can't do with housing that they have said, yeah, regional one, we do want all of our plans to speak to one another,
Okay,
but conducting a similar exercise to have one housing action plan is not kind of in the cards in their estimation. I think, again, we expect that there will be significant overlap between what the town of Mountain Village, what the town of Telluride are putting in their 6-year plans and what we will. But we do intend to have separate documents by that 2028 date that do spell out what is our specific effort going to look like versus theirs. It has been an ongoing conversation. We suggested it. I don't think it's going to work quite as well as the housing needs assessment process.
that's
So-
fair. I can see that. I do like the idea of our coordinating though, and I think that IG work group, that'll be a good way to do it.
I have a question about that, whether there's been discussions about expanding that throughout the county to the west end of the county, and is there, plans for just concentrating that on the east end of the county? This came up at the IGA, or sorry, at the intergovernmental meeting, and Mayor Meehan from Norwood asked about potentially being included in such a plan.
I think it hasn't been a topic of conversation yet. I think one aspect is I don't think Norwood quite meets the threshold where it's a requirement. I think we as a county can definitely offer that we would include Norwood in our study, since, I think we are going to have Norwood, Ophir, Saw Pit, and even though they're not incorporated, Placerville, within our conversations of our housing plan. And so I do believe that we'll be integrating a lot of the Norwood values, and I'm happy to make sure that we engage town of Norwood, in that process. We just have not formalized how that might look. As I mentioned, I've only really had cursory conversations with the two towns who are required to develop those plans about not combining that effort. And I think we'll be developing that, as Drea mentioned, once we're through our kind of code audit and community engagement process, because we do have a little bit of time to make the plan what we want it to be. So.
Great.
And finally.
All right, and our last slide is an update on Prop 123. So Jared and Mike have covered this in past meetings, so I'll give a brief overview and share current updates. So what is Prop 123? It was approved by Colorado voters November of 2022. It's a statewide affordable housing initiative designed to address Colorado's housing crisis. So the funding administration is currently split between Department of Local Affairs, where they administer 40% of programs, and 60% is administered through the Office of Economic Development and International Trades. Both agencies provide grants and loans to support local affordable housing efforts. To be eligible for those programs, local governments must opt into Prop 123 by submitting a 3-year affordable housing commitment to be eligible for such funding. Some eligible funding uses include new construction, land banking, home ownership initiatives, modular and factory built housing. The county's commitment is 11 units. And our commitment filing date to report on that is December 31st, 2026. So current progress includes internal coordination with our planning and building team to identify eligible projects. We're also doing a joint assessment underway with Mountain Village and the town of Telluride to evaluate potential units to contribute towards the commitment. So what type of units count towards the county's commitment? So for rental housing, this typically would include rental at or below 60% AMI. For sale housing at or below 100% AMI, the county falls under a rural resort. So the AMI ranges are adjusted there, where rental is up to 140% AMI and for sale housing is up to 160% AMI. So this would include types of construction such as new construction, and that would be counted when a building permit is issued along with a affordability mechanism in place. Preservation, so expiring units, acquisition or rehabilitation project would count, as well as conversions from market rate units or an adaptive reuse, and then naturally occurring affordable housing projects would qualify as elements to count towards the county's 11 unit commitment. Any questions? Or did Jared want to fill anything that I may have missed?
A
Yeah.
question, Andrea, the jackhammer stole the words. from the
I know, it's a bit loud.
sentence. I caught all the various parameters up until the very last one category that could be counted. Could you restate that?
Yeah, naturally occurring affordable housing units. So new or newly preserved or converted units would qualify.
Okay, so the naturally occurring was throwing me off.
Yeah,
I was hoping they just grew organically in the fields. But what I think that means is just housing stock that we create or that is existing that we convert.
correct.
Got it. Thank you.
AKA new housing that did not exist previously.
Yes.
That is a funny term.
Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you for
Yeah,
that
it's
clarification.
I
I was confused.
Yeah, that is a term that is on DOLA's website. So it's
You-
one of their terms.
You can imagine, commissioners, and I used to live in a town in Colorado where a house could potentially be built and meet 60% or, up to 100% AMI rental value, right? We know we don't have that kind of stock happening naturally here. So, but to that point, any mitigation units that are created as part of our processes that we do have in place could potentially count as long as they meet these measures. So,
Thank you for clarification.
All right, and I have one more slide. All right, so I hope this update was informative. I appreciate Jared filling in the gaps, and I hope you found value in receiving this monthly. The next update is scheduled for the 23rd that we decided on. I appreciate your engagement and welcome any thoughts and suggestions, and happy to answer any questions that weren't addressed. Yes, Commissioner Waring.
Actually, a challenge for you, Drea. Next time, let's put duct tape on Jared's head and you get to answer all of our questions. And I mean that because I think that as you grow into this position, that it would be great to have you feel confident and competent and able to field all questions, because they'll start to come at you from the public and they'll start to come at you from the commissioners. And while it's great to have Jared as a resource and Mike, by next month, I hope that you'll be able to step in a little more deeply.
Thank you for that comment.
Maybe for next month, we'll have the duct tape just on half of his mouth. Then little time to eat. But I like that. Yeah, we like to empower our staff. Yeah, we needed you. We're so happy you're here.
Thank you.
I will, if I may, commissioners, I will say a lot of the things that Drea has been helping us with are unseen things right now. They are, she's done a fantastic job of auditing files, of evaluating finances with our current contractors, and a number of other things that, frankly, I think we had not been engaging in as well as we could have been. And so I want to make sure you know that she's been doing great work, needed work that a lot of times you might not see or know just when you're walking around. And I want to thank Drea for one, great presentation, two, being a great colleague and a great addition to the team, because it's been great having her along. So.
Terrific.
I do have a question about the evaluation of the land use code process, and specifically the CH zone district, and kind of where we're at with that process, and hoping to just get an update there.
Can we pause until our next item?
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah,
Before you
I'm
go,
jumping
though,
ahead.
You heard me speak about timelines, and I really think that those are important for all of our projects, even if they shift and change and we add and subtract. And I remember asking for that previously, and we did have a presentation that included a timeline. It might have been from Jim Keough, is that right? Is there a way that we could have a timeline for each of these? And maybe you pull from what Jim had originally developed, so that we could have a slide that looks like what you've got here, which is great, and then a second slide with the timeline, and that we could all just, obviously, again, they can change, but a draft as we go through it.
Yeah, just to confirm, you're looking for like a timeline on the status of the project,
Kind of like, what are the major steps?
the milestones.
The major milestones, including like moving in, and where are we in that timeline? Just to get an overall picture of what we're aiming for and where we are.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
again, those I totally understand, they change, but I think without a goal or with a goal, we're more likely to, I think, move it along. That not that you're not trying to move it along, but just to have that visual, I think, is important. So that would be an ask of mine if the other commissioners feel like that might be helpful.
Yeah, I think that it's valuable to have a timeline, and of course we can adjust as reality sets in, but it is useful.
It never hurts to set a goal.
Okay, yeah, thank you both. I know that's another layer, but I think once it's set up, it shouldn't be too hard to adjust as we go.
Of course. Yeah, I can include that for next month's update.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All righty. Appreciate that. All right, now we are moving on to item 7B, discussion of San Miguel County Affordable Housing Community Facilitation and Code Evaluation. We need a shorthand for that title.
We've talked about doing that. And we'll, and be mindful of whatever acronym comes out of that as well.
Thank you.
So we've got, Logan Simpson, selected as our contractor, and they are under contract. We're just in very early stages. But right up front, this is about more than the community housing zone. This is about looking at all of the tools in our toolbox, everything in the land use code, and things that aren't in the land use code, maybe should be there, or in, our other programs and regulations that can help, facilitate and encourage the creation of actual housing throughout the community. So the first part is what's called project orientation meeting and project foundation. So working with the consultant staff. Jared prepared
I had
a
nothing to do last night, so I
yeah.
prepared a brief slideshow.
So yeah, we're in that step one. So we've had our first kickoff meeting with the consultant, identified things that we need to do. We're doing ongoing project coordination. Um, and also outlining how we'll be developing the advisory committee or group. And another thing that they're putting together is their community engagement plan. If you'll recall from the East End Master Plan, it laid out all the various steps that we were going to go through on that, from advisory group to focus meetings to, stakeholder meetings and what have you. And then also as part of that, they're looking at doing a preliminary document review. So they'll, I'll be giving them a lot of information. We'll all be giving them information about what's in the code right now and some of the history and things that we have considered and the discussion points. So they're not walking in blind. We want them to know the history and what's going on. And then we move to step two. And this is where they're identifying issues and doing analysis. And they'll be doing that through a number of ways. They'll be doing a number of community listening sessions. And those will be in a number of formats to really get out and, try and, talk to everybody. Give everybody a venue that they're comfortable with. And then they really will dive into the existing code analysis and constraints review. Continuing with the public outreach and also starting to air some preliminary recommendations so that we're hearing from people, getting feedback on what it is. And then they'll also be coming out in that second phase with their code audit report. And then step three is where things really get going. That's the so looking at their final code audit report and doing the actual code drafting. So they'll be delivering a report to us as well as draft land use code amendments, and getting ready to go to public hearing. And then the final step 4, we'll be doing work sessions and outreach and trying to get the word out as to this is the proposed draft. And having that out for public review. And then at that point, going to the Planning Commission for review and recommendation, and then BOCC consideration for adoption. And we look at this being about an 18-month project. So, their timeline had us going out. It might be, fall of 2026, but, so 15 to 18 months.
There's that timeline I love.
Yes.
Everybody needs a Gantt chart. You just to kind of press upon a couple different items that Kay mentioned. A lot of the conversation I see is going to be happening in that task number 2, issue identification and analysis. And as Kay provided, we talked with them in our kickoff meeting about how they are going to engage the community. They're developing a plan for that. And we did ask them to make sure that they concentrate not only on, the voices that can show up to every meeting, but also the voices that don't show up to every meeting or can't show up to every meeting. And so they have conveyed to us that, this is not their first rodeo. One of the reasons we selected Logan Simpson is because of their very long and very significant history doing these types of projects. And so that is something we really impressed upon them is going to be important to us, along with working with an advisory group that they are going to give us some initial indication of their suggestions about how to solicit input from that group. I think we know, just based on our various housing conversations that we've had over the last couple of years, you all longer than I, we know there may be a few really interested folks that we want to have in that room having those conversations. And so we'll be working with them to identify how to develop that group, and we'll be seeking some of those inputs from you commissioners on who do you think are really need to be in those rooms. And you all, as one example, one of you may be able to go to some of these meetings and participate as part of this process as well. So I really put a lot of stock in that second task of collecting that community input on what is and is not working with housing. And, hopefully we do find, and Logan Simpson might have some good ideas because they practice this in a lot of other places, some ways to attack some of those problems. So,
Jared, that sounds really encouraging, and I share your hope that Logan Simpson's pretty impressive track record will serve us well. I'm wondering if we, the commissioners, will have an opportunity to meet with them as they are creating those community-specific organized meetings and community-specific advisory board to discuss their ideas and be able to respond, or if that's something that is going to be presented to us as a done deal.
Yeah, so much like we did with the East End Master Plan, when we have the engagement plan ready, we'll probably be presenting that to you so you know what's coming. And with the master plan, that advisory group was, he took applications on that. And then the planning commission, because they were the adopting board or body on that, the planning commission appointed the members. So I would expect very similarly coming to you, and you will appoint the members to the advisory group.
Great. And will the parameters for that board be something that is codified by Logan Simpson, or is that something that we get to consider as we're looking at applicants and making appointments?
So we'll definitely be drafting up something. One thing we found with the master plan was that it was necessary to have not necessarily bylaws, but rules of conduct. So we'll be bringing that out as well. So, there's definitely a lot for us to prepare, but I think we'll have, what you guys need. So you can be fully informed and involved all through.
That was really good questions, Lance. And just to follow up on that, I think I heard Commissioner Waring saying or suggesting that maybe the BOCC could have some input into that engagement plan, that it wouldn't just be presented as a fait accompli, because we are the ones kind of on the front line, and I think we have a pretty good sense of what people expect and what they hope. One thing I would say is that I heard a lot of frustration in the community about the public engagement process for the East End Master Plan, that we had these sort of open house kind of format where people were just kind of went to stations, that there was no real community conversation around it. And I know those can be difficult to manage, but I also think that that is something that our community really values is, town hall kind of formats. And obviously those are part of this as we go through the land use code development and everything. But I can't tell you how many times I heard people say, I don't want, this going up and putting stickers on things.
did not feel like a real public engagement. So that's just a little input from me. And again, I think we really care, I really care, and I think you do because you asked that question, what that public engagement process looks like. Does that sound reasonable to?
Yeah, and, as we've discussed with them, we're looking at a multitude of ways, and of, getting feedback from people and conversing. Town hall, type meetings have their own, or, open-ended
Yeah.
they,
Has to have structure.
Yeah.
there has to be structure, and, so there's, always somebody feeling that they didn't get heard. And we're trying to find multiple ways that people are getting heard. And because we are doing this multi, uh,
Multifaceted.
methodology,
Yeah.
not everybody's going to be present for every single conversation. So, in the end, we're still, assimilating everything and having to turn it into, the end product. And, so you're always going to have somebody say, but I said this, why isn't it in here?
I
And,
understand that.
it doesn't always make it through.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think what I hear Anne saying as well is just giving people the format in which they feel actually heard and that their feedback has been
Yeah.
aptly taken. And I would agree with that completely, just having worked through the East End Master.
Yeah. I'm really pleased to see that this project takes us all the way through kind of land use code updates and approvals. I didn't expect it to be quite that tangible, if you will, and I
Yeah.
think that's really fantastic.
No, that was absolutely essential. It doesn't
Yeah.
do us any good to do all the other work without carrying it through.
I think it's great.
And commissioners, I just wanted to speak at least to one of the items that we were, kind of prompted some of this. We understand that the community has kind of envisioned this project as a project to address community housing zone district in some way.
Absolutely.
And I think that the question that I would pose to community members is, get your thinking caps on about what exactly is wrong with that zone district, not a project associated with that zone district, right? But what about that underlying zoning is not working? Because as I came on, I knew that the community housing zone district issue had been passed. Then we had the Diamond Ridge conversation, and that went to court. And I think that there's a lot of community confusion separating the zoning from the project, right? And so I want to make sure that everybody is primed to have a conversation about the underlying zoning and how it may or may not be used, and how we have one parcel within the county right now that does fall under this zoning type. And so again, I want that to be the conversation of how to improve the zoning to achieve affordable housing, not to rehash a project that frankly is not moving anywhere right now. So.
Yeah, and it's not just about community housing, it's about our entire code and any other programs and incentives that we can come up with to encourage the creation of and facilitate the creation of housing everywhere. It's not about only one zone district. It's about all the ways we can do this.
Understood. I have some just questions about the structure of this, because as in reading through it, I read about was advisory council? What was that called? The ACE, hang on.
We haven't decided officially if it's an advisory council, advisory committee, advisory group.
Okay, so how, then I heard about focus groups and all this. I want to understand, like, a little bit more about how that, what we're, just, let's give it a name right now, that community work group or something like that? Is that what was also envisioned by the advisory committee? Or is that a different group?
So the advisory group would be, I think, the community work group.
Okay, advisory group, okay.
Yeah. And there are some technical reasons as to why you would call them an advisory committee or an advisory group that I won't bore you with today. And that's a TBD.
Sure.
But so, overall, the advisory group hopefully will have a broad range of experiences and expertise. But then focus groups are talking to various assemblies
Sure.
of, individuals that have a very, more specific one. We did the master plan. We had a focus group that was about transportation. We had a focus group about water and wastewater, natural resources and so on and so forth. So we'll be looking at who the constituents are and who the stakeholders are, and figuring out exactly how those come together. We don't have a list right now.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood. I wasn't sure if the advisory committee was Jared, Kay, and Drea. That's a different team. Okay, so
No.
we're gonna have this ongoing advisory group, whatever they're called, and they will have regular engagement all the
Mhm.
way through this process. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and do we know about when, just so that we can start recruiting, people are thinking about who might be appropriate for that? Do we know when that will start to come together?
I don't have that right now. It'll be fairly soon, but I don't
Okay.
have anything right now.
Okay,
I think that, just based on Logan Simpson's initial schedule, that's going to be happening this fall. So August through approximately October, November. And so I think that is the window that if you're going out and you've got a friend or somebody approaches you and says, "Hey, I'm really interested in that, and I think I'd be really good because of my set of skills to really look at this big picture," you could say, "Well, I think it's going to really form up this fall."
okay.
And then they would be kind of riding along this process, as Kay mentioned. The advisory group will be kind of that constant big picture approach to how are we achieving affordable housing within our code. And then at the same time, we'll be kind of drilling down into these focus groups to say, what's not working with ADUs, or what is working with ADUs, or is water and wastewater the biggest problem that we have to affordable housing, or those kind of questions. So
Sorry if I missed this, but how many people are envisioned to be on the advisory group?
We don't know yet.
Okay.
somewhere between not enough and too unruly to manage. So
Yeah.
I think you're hearing a lot of interest from the commissioners in that advisory group. And so the sooner, without derailing the process or jumping ahead, but that we could get an outline of what that structure would be, what their responsibilities would be, what kind of folks we're looking for, then we can all start trying to populate that group.
Great.
And I like your idea of Kay, or of having like applications and
Mhm.
having the BOCC review that and figure that out with your guidance. Let me see if I have any. I would like to hear a little bit more. Well, no, I think I got that part. This is. All right. Yeah, it's great. I don't know anything else. Anybody?
Thank you for that update. I was jumping the gun earlier.
I don't know if it said anywhere in here specifically that it was gonna address the community housing zone district, so I understand why you were wondering where that was coming
Yeah,
in.
it was,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay.
Eager.
Well, I think the conversation will be ongoing. And we had a really good kickoff. I think their team is already hard at work getting some structure behind a few things. And thanks to Kay, Drea, and the planning staff, because we're going to pull everybody in on this to make sure we're getting all the staff resources in the room as well as community resources. So.
Great. I'm looking at the timeline. It says community engagement plan will be developed in July. So then I guess the question is, when would you come to us with that? We should get it on the agenda, at least roughly. When would you come to us with that sort of draft engagement plan?
I would like to defer at least until we have our next meeting with Logan Simpson. We did impress upon them this week that this is going to be one of our more important pieces, and they are going to work on it. But I don't want to get ahead of them in any way, and so I would say if we could revisit that either next meeting or in the next couple meetings, we can have a firmer timeline.
Yeah.
When are you meeting with them again?
So we're setting up a standing bi-weekly meeting.
Good.
And I think, our first one of those is
8th.
the 8th. Yeah, July 8th. But making sure that we get a time on everybody's calendar. So, we're not letting things slip.
I love it.
They've also committed to listen in to our housing needs assessment presentation on the 7th, as well as that will be informative for them in some of their pursuits as well.
That's great.
All right, we're ready to move on. Thank you. Now to number 8, manager matters.
No, thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. As you know, Commissioner Waring, Jared, and I attended the Association of Realtors meeting this morning to speak about our housing projects, roads, the deed restriction, ongoing conversation that we'll be having, as well as the mitigation fee update. I'll let Commissioner Waring share more about that if he wishes. We are planning to launch the community survey to inform potential commissioner priorities and budgetary items this Friday, and I'll send you a draft of that tomorrow, if not later today, for your review before we push that out. Jared and Ryan have been working on the Imogene repair contract with our selected contractor, and looking forward to getting that signed and completed so that we can commence work. That will be happening very soon. Likewise, we'll be putting out the request for proposals for the road repair and improvements this week as well. I spoke with Dave Foley earlier this week regarding the San Miguel County Railroad right-of-way in Saw Pit. He did some surveying of land that we own, and as well as the town of Saw Pit land, and has requested authorization to do some title work to verify his findings before he comes back to us to show what land we own and how that might affect alignment of the future Down Valley Connector Trail, as well as some of the infrastructure improvements that Saw Pit has already undertaken, such as their new well. Good news is we thought their well was going to be on our property. It's actually technically on their property, but we discovered that our property is being used for some primary access points. So we're gonna validate that before we have a further conversation. Attorney General Phil Weiser, as you know, will be here on Thursday, July 3rd at 10 a.m. at the library. I sent out an invite to the towns of Telluride, Mountain Village, and Norwood mayors and managers, asking them to circulate that with their councils for their participation, as was requested by Diana Noyes with Mr. Weiser's office. On July 15th, Lisa Poole and Senator Hickenlooper will be here for a gondola visit. And then I believe the commissioners also were informed of a subsequent visit with Senator Hickenlooper and his staff later in the month. I don't have an exact date for that yet, but you may.
Sorry, is Senator Hickenlooper gonna be on the gondola tour or just Lisa?
I thought it was just Lisa.
Okay,
Yes, Senator Hickenlooper has previously been here
Yeah.
for the gondola and infrastructure, so I think this is more to make sure that his Southwest area rep is very familiar with the project and updates of where we are at.
and I'm sorry, Mike, I wasn't aware that the senator would be himself here later in the month. Do you have any?
That's Commissioner
want to
Waring.
mention?
I got a call yesterday from his assistant, Lisa Poole,
Mhm.
Southwest assistant, and she doesn't have a firm date, but is looking for the second half of August as a potential visit for Senator Hickenlooper during the recess. And when those dates are set, she will be putting together various community gatherings to try to get as much input as possible.
Great.
Keep you posted.
Thank you. And then I wanted to make sure that the next gondola leadership meeting is on your radars and on your schedules. That will be July 28th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. On Zoom as well as in person, I believe, up in Mountain Village. Governor Jared Polis received a drought disaster declaration, which he has declared. Well, he received notice from the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Interior regarding a request of 2 primary drought counties being designated as Ouray and Montezuma counties. We are contiguous with Ouray, so that makes us eligible along with the other 5 counties that they're contiguous with for some programs for drought relief, especially for farmers and ranchers. Shannon Armstrong passed this along to us while we were in the meeting, and I've asked her to push that out and to make sure that Annika Christensen is also informed of that and what potential financial relief programs may be available for those particularly our West End farmers and ranchers. We welcomed our new building inspector this week, Serge, who is up and running, and we're extremely excited to have him on board. Likewise, Megan Knowles starts on Monday as our new communications coordinator. And a big thank you to Katie Nisham Ramirez, as well as Heather Woodland and others for filling in this month while we've been in a deficit there. And that's all I have for right now. Do you have any questions for me?
I have a question about the Mill Creek survey.
Yes.
That was supposed to get out May 1st. And we're coming up on July 1st. If you don't have an answer, that's fine, but I had touched base with Parks and Open Space Department, I don't know, 10 days ago or 5 days ago, and they said it was imminent, but I still haven't seen it. And now I'm a little concerned about us not
Right.
having the full, let's see, I mean, we'd set it up for May, June, July, so we could capture kind of the range of community members.
Correct.
And now we're gonna miss the people who leave for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many.
I was also told the same thing as you, that it was going out this week, and I'm not seeing it on the main page of our website, so we will make sure that is. Oh, okay. I do remember. So Janet, our Janet Cass, Parks and Open Space Director, had asked when we were putting out the community survey, because we didn't want necessarily confusion of the two. I said, I think it would be fine with at least a few days separation. So she's planning to launch hers next Monday.
So you're gonna launch the community survey Friday?
Friday.
Hers next Monday?
Yes, just because I understand we wanted more separation, but we don't want to delay either one. And I do think it will be clear, given the titles of them, of which is which. One says Community Budget Survey, the other says Mill Creek Park. So unless you have a concern about the closeness of those two release dates, we could separate them further.
Are you calling it the community budget survey, or how about community priorities or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that was in the draft of right now was community budget, but I would agree with you.
Because it's the priorities for, yeah.
Right, and that's part of the reason I want you guys to review it tomorrow.
Okay, so, I mean, I don't love it, but what do you guys think? What do you commissioners think?
I think the sooner we get these out, the better, given that we have a captive audience right now of residents.
I do think that the Mill Creek survey is potentially less pressing, given the reason that you mentioned. Our original intent was to capture folks before they left for summer. If they're leaving, they're likely already out of town. So I think we're really looking, and we're not planning on making any major investments into the park this summer.
Right.
So I do think if that launched a week or two later and then ran into the fall or early fall to capture the folks that might be returning for school or from vacation.
What if we just did that one in August and September?
I think that's fine. It's really up to you guys.
Sure, let's do a staggered start instead
Okay.
of overburdening folks with surveys.
And when would our community priority survey wrap up?
The intent is that it would be out for 5 weeks.
Okay,
So it'd wrap up in early August.
I think that's fine.
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jared, what did he miss? I
I don't think that Mike missed anything today,
feel like
or at least I'm chasing my tail enough to that I don't know anything.
like on a game show. Okay.
I have one question about the community development mini grant through Region 10.
Yeah.
And it says that there can be only one application per member jurisdiction to be considered, and that would also include the towns, correct?
Yes.
And do you know if any of the towns are considering applying?
We actually first internally circulated that between Drea, Jared, and myself to see if we had a need for this. We don't have an identified need for this, so I do want to pass that opportunity. I'll make sure that the towns know if we're not going to apply that one of them could apply, but we also want to know who is going to apply so that we might support them if they wish.
Great.
So the towns being Norwood, all the incorporated towns, is that who you're gonna
Correct.
share it with?
Mhm.
Yeah, nothing immediately came to mind for me to, yeah, I love that idea of passing it on to them. But yeah, the idea of coordinating too is great.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks, Helena. Commissioner Gleason.
I just called them you guys, so I think.
Use guys.
All right, shall we move on to commissioner updates?
Yes.
You go, Lance, with that enthusiasm.
All right. Consulting my notes, and even though I'm enthusiastic, I'm unprepared. We all three commissioners, joined in on the TENS meeting that Chris Arndt proposed and hosted, regarding potential geothermal in our region. It was fascinating. I'm sure we should and can talk more about that, but for right now, we've all got the same information, and it sounds like there's another follow-up meeting coming up September 6th, which unfortunately is a Wednesday, so they may want to send a representative for that. Beyond that, I'm just gonna read a text that I got from a local broker after the meeting, and the text reads, Lance, while we may disagree on a couple of big items, such as the abrupt and dramatic implementation of impact fees, I appreciate your candor and your obvious dedication to the good of the county. Thank you for your service. I have another one that's shorter and sweeter. I appreciate your delivery and thoughtful responses. So that's my report on our Realtor meeting this morning.
Thank you for going and representing.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
It was a good breakfast, good crowd,
Yeah.
and I think it was time well spent.
And they honored Sheriff Bill at the outset of the meeting for his
Was he there?
years. He was,
Fantastic.
yes.
Lance, you mentioned another comment that you got on your way out the door from somebody, a waiter or server.
Truth.
Is it fair to ask you to share that one too? Because I think that's a whole different audience that heard your comments.
Sure. On the way out the door, one of the Beeks staff stopped me and thanked me for, introduced himself and said, I grew up here and I thank you for thinking of trying to house folks like me and working so hard on workforce housing, which felt really good. And I think that the brokers in the room were not in disagreement with that, but just in execution, timing, and perhaps in how the formula has been created and drafted and implemented. In other words, we could dicker a little over the numbers. But a lot of the questions that I received this morning were answerable. And that's not to say that the answers were welcome, but they weren't out of left field. They were thoughtful questions and honest questions, and I tried to give the same kind of response.
Good for you. Maybe at some point you could just share with Galena and I what the questions were. You don't have to do it right now, but what the questions were and maybe even your thoughts on responses, because I imagine we will all continue to get the similar questions.
Be happy to.
Yeah, and I think I put together that little spreadsheet
That was really handy. Thank you.
Was it helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
Keep that on the top of your pile.
Yes, and if anyone needs to, this is just estimating the actual cost and the additional square foot cost, the additional percentage cost at various breakpoints. And so please also add to that if you have anything to add as you gain, because I think it's a nice place, a resource for the commissioners. So well done, Lance.
Thanks, Dan.
Lena, you want to go?
Sure. Last week, I met with Senator Bennett's new Southwest area rep aide Wyatt Bear, and our natural resources director, Star Jameson, joined in on the meeting as well. She really wanted to converse with Wyatt. And we talked about the reconciliation budget proposal and provisions within that bill that could adversely affect San Miguel County and Colorado, including Medicaid, SNAP, and as well as the public lands disposal at that moment in time, which was a real concern. We also talked about timing of the Northern Dolores NCA being introduced, and I just really imparted on him the importance of engaging local stakeholders at the beginning of that process. I've been having a lot of conversations with constituents who just want to be part of the conversation and want to see those potential proposed maps rolled out and just be part of the process from the inception of the conversations. And I think he heard that. Yeah, and then just to piggyback on that informative session on thermal energy networks that we all attended. And just for public listening, I just thought I'd give like a really brief synopsis on what we learned there. And basically thermal energy networks, energy utilization is tapping into shallow geothermal with the end goal of generating heating and cooling mechanisms for municipal, commercial, and residential purposes. And once the systems are established, they found that they're way more cost effective than natural gas or propane. And there are many states, including Colorado, that are introducing gas to geothermal transition legislation. So it's something that I think we'll be seeing come down the pipe. And Mountain Village is really on the forefront of this, and they've applied for grant funding to pursue a thermal energy pilot program in their municipality. And I was a little confused on that date because I had written down there would be a future work session on September 3rd, and you said the 6th, so
Next week's better.
I have to reference my note.
I got the 3rd too.
Okay,
Good.
okay.
Yeah, but okay,
Um,
yeah, which, is that on Wednesday?
and is that on a Wednesday?
Check, maybe I was just. Man,
It is,
It
it's a
is.
Wednesday.
Okay,
I
yeah,
misspoke on the date.
but it's a Wednesday, so we'll need to find a representative absolutely to go to that, because I think we should keep our finger on that pulse.
Or maybe we could even schedule our meeting to accommodate that. I'm open to that if you all see what it is. Let's
Yeah.
just keep that open. I think it can-
Yeah. That same day of that meeting, I thought it worth mentioning that I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Sheriff Dan Koval, just to get more acquainted and talk about how his transition into office is going, and how the commissioners can support his leadership and goals in this transitional period. So it was great to have the opportunity to sit down and talk with Sheriff Koval. Then yesterday I mentioned this last week, but I attended a informative session with Montezuma Land Trust and Western Colorado Land Trust about innovative solutions being devised for placing working farms and ranches into conservation easements. And this is kind of different from what exists currently, and that the vision behind this is to keep the properties as active and productive agricultural land in perpetuity. And the motivation is to give communities the long-term economic and ecological benefits of guaranteeing ag lands stay productive and creating succession plans for farmers and ranchers that are struggling to devise solutions for the future of their operations.
Is
And
that what the Indian Ridge Farm is exploring?
they're,
Similar?
they're very much in exploration phase
Yeah.
of this, and they just brought together these two land trust entities to discuss what the land trust entities are working on. Chris Hazen was present, as was Janet Cass, to just think about how this could potentially work within the county. And it's a pretty like cutting edge idea that is being kind of sprouting within the state. So it was very informative, and I think it has a lot of promise. And then this morning I had the opportunity, thanks to Lance for attending the TAR meeting, that I joined the Bike to Work Day, and it was really fun and beautiful, and there's great attendance from county staff with folks from planning, the clerk's office, assessors, natural resources, and there were some town of Telluride staff present as well. And it was just the best way to start the day. Really enjoyed it.
For you, Melina?
Yeah, it was good for me.
I did mine 2
Thank
weeks
you.
early.
If you did.
I announced 2 weeks ago that I just had bike to work day, and they're like, Ann, it's not today. And I try to bike to work when I can.
Yeah, that's all I have to report.
Good stuff, Glee.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it was last Friday, June 19th, I attended the NACO West Region monthly meeting, which I don't believe I had ever attended before. And NACO is the National Association of Counties. But this agenda item caught my attention. It was to discuss the federal tax bill that's being worked on right now in Washington and key provisions that might impact counties. And it's a little premature because, as we know, it's a moving target, but there were a couple of points that I found interesting, should they stick. One was that, and this will interest our staff too, that the tax exempt status of municipal bonds is expected to be retained. That was going to be a big change. So that was really good to know. And evidently NACO had played a big part in getting that provision removed by kind of storytelling, Lance, talking about all of the many projects within counties that are funded by municipal bonds. So I think that's a relief, assuming that it stays out as it is. The other thing that was interesting was that the SALT's state and local tax deduction provision, I don't know if y'all remember, but in the first Trump administration, the Congress, and reduced the maximum amount of state and local taxes that you could deduct from your income taxes to $10,000 a year, which is a very big deal for higher property tax areas, potentially ours as well. So the expectation is that that will increase significantly with this new bill. There'll still be a cap. It'll be $40,000 for married people filing jointly who make less than 500,000, and sort of comparable to singles, but that's a big difference for some of the jurisdictions that have higher property taxes, which, yeah. And then the other thing we talked about was that was most interesting to me was about Medicaid. And I didn't know this, but in 25 states, the counties actually contribute to Medicaid, like the cost of the program. In Colorado, it's jointly shared with the federal and state government, but in 25 states, the states require the counties to participate as well. We don't do that. We do administer the program, like applications and so forth, but we don't have to contribute to the actual program. But a couple things that might impact our county specifically are the FMAP, which is federal funding for the administration of Medicaid. So we evidently get an allocation. I think it comes through the state. Yeah, it does, to do that administrative work that our Human Services Department does. And the current proposal is to reduce that administrative funding for states who allow undocumented immigrants to enroll in public health insurance, even though all of those states are paying that full share themselves. So it's kind of it's a policy thing that definitely could impact Colorado, because we have a couple of different programs, one for pregnant women and children, and then another one for just anybody who manages to get a lucky number in the ballot, or the lottery for health insurance. But anyway, that could be an impact for us. And then the other one was the cost for our county to administer the new work requirements, which we wrote a letter on at one point. There's going to be a work requirement very likely for people without dependents ages 19 to 64. But then interestingly, I think I've told you in the past that when I spoke to our Human Services Director, well, she felt that was actually not a bad provision. She said, even though it does require additional administration, she thinks that it will help ensure that Medicaid is going to people who really need it. So that was kind of reassuring. But again, it's another administrative cost that we will bear. So interesting, that was that meeting. And then on last Friday, June 20th, I went to the West Region Wildfire Council showcase of 4 Down Valley properties that are being put out to bid for fire mitigation. So West Region Wildfire Council has worked very closely with these 4 property owners to kind of identify what kind of thinning and cutting and so forth needs to be done to mitigate their properties. And so I just looked at 4 of the different properties, just super interesting to see kind of how that actually works. It's going to be a big change for those properties for sure. There's no doubt, and we've all seen pictures of it, but interestingly going up and like seeing how many of those trees are coming down, it's a big deal, but it also is super effective in as a fire break. And just to remind the public that there are funds available to offset the cost of that mitigation. You can apply through the West Region Wildfire Council. So that's my report. All righty. Now I think we're ready to move on to item number 10, attorney matters. Maura Fahey, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. All right, so the first thing I have is the second quarter litigation update. That's in the packet. There's not, I think the biggest changes that are noted in bold are things we've already talked about in prior meetings. in particular, the Colorado Supreme Court decision in the Suncor and Exxon case, and a bit of an update on the status of that case, just that the mandate was stayed so that Suncor and Exxon could seek US Supreme Court review. So that will continue to kind of be on hold. Our case potentially could restart, but our attorneys are still evaluating whether that's something they want to pursue. Because having the two cases go forward on separate tracks might result in inconsistent rulings. So they're still evaluating that. And then in the 3K9 appeal, involving our housing mitigation fee, that one has an appeal was filed with the Colorado Court of Appeals, and the briefing in that case will take place this summer. And then the other biggest update is in the litigation involving Measure 3A.
Before you go to that,
Yeah.
I have a question about the 3K9.
Yep.
Rule 57. I finally
Yes.
figured out what Rule 106 is. And I looked up Rule 57. It's about a declaratory judgment, but I didn't get further than that.
Yeah. So I'll just go over both the difference between Rule 106 and Rule 57, because I think it's called out a couple times in some of these different case updates. So Rule 106 is the mechanism for, there's 4 different pieces of that rule, but 2 that are relevant to local governments, or most relevant to this board in particular, is subsection A2, which is to compel officials to act, and then A4, which is challenging judicial-like decisions. So under A2, someone could file an action to compel a body or a person to perform a non-discretionary or mandatory action. And then under A4, which is the one that I think both 3K9 and the Lucarelli decision involve, or litigation involve, is providing a basis to challenge a judicial or quasi-judicial decision, where the challenge is based on whether or not the public body has exceeded its jurisdiction or abused its discretion. And in those cases, the review is based on the record that was before that decision-making body at the time the decision was made. So to go specifically to the 3K9 case, there the 106 action is a challenge to the BOCC's denial of their appeal and the determination of the employee housing mitigation fee for that particular property. So it's a very fact-based challenge. Rule 57 is the mechanism for bringing a declaratory judgment action, and that's used to challenge the validity of policymaking by the governing body, that acting in its legislative role. And in that situation, there isn't, a record of a decision necessarily. So there we get involved in discovery and depositions that can go outside, any records that are available. And the example of that in the 3K9 case is a challenge to the employee housing mitigation fee as being inconsistent with state law. So it's not as applied to any particular property, just the
General concept.
Yeah. Yep. And so the court ruled on the Rule 57 challenge, which was brought first. The 106 was stayed because really the question of, does the fee and the code as a whole violate state law, would probably determine the outcome in the Rule 106 challenge to some extent. So the court ruled in favor of the county on the Rule 57 action, finding the fee did not violate state law. So now that's going up on appeal, and the 106 is going to stay in the district court.
Okay. So what's this mean here? The county consented to 3K9's motion to certify the order on the Rule 57 claim for appeal. What does that mean?
So typically you wouldn't be able to appeal a case up to the next level until the whole thing had been resolved. But because the 106 action had been stayed, the normal course would be for the court to, okay, we resolved the 57 claim. Now we'll go back and resolve the 106 claim. But the plaintiffs wanted to just continue to pursue that Rule 57 claim before getting into that argument specific to their property. And we agreed with that it would be the most efficient way to resolve the case, to just get an answer to the question of, does the mitigation fee stand on the law? And then we'll go back down depending on the outcome of that. Any other questions on that piece?
Thank you, that helps so much.
Yeah, the other biggest update, I think, since the last report is in the Measure 3A litigation, which the county was dismissed from that case on the eve of the trial. The trial did go forward between the plaintiff and Smart. We're still waiting for a decision from the court on the outcome of that. So hopefully by the next update, we'll have the results of that, and whether the measure will stand. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions on specific cases that are included in here, but those are kind of the biggest substantive ones.
Anybody? All good?
Okay.
Thank you.
So now moving on to item 10B, which is discussion of a response, if any, to the letter received from Phil Weiser, Attorney General, State of Colorado, on Executive Order 14287, Department of Homeland Security release, sanctuary jurisdictions defying federal immigration law.
And Maura is gonna take the lead on this, and I just have a little bit of info to tack on at the end, maybe.
Cool, thanks.
So just as a little bit of background, on April 28th, the President issued Executive Order 14287, which directed the Attorney General and Department of Homeland Security to publish a list of states and local jurisdictions that obstruct the enforcement of federal immigration laws. That was the only direction that was provided with respect to that. And then on May 22nd, DHS released its list of sanctuary jurisdictions as required by the executive order. The executive order did not establish any criteria for determining what is a sanctuary jurisdiction. In a press release that was issued along with the list, DHS noted that the list includes cities, counties, and states that are deliberately obstructing the enforcement of federal immigration laws and endangering American citizens. Sanctuary cities protect dangerous criminal illegal aliens from facing consequences and put law enforcement in grave danger. San Miguel County was included on that list. There is another, I'm not exactly sure of the source of this, but at one point I saw a list of criteria that were supposedly used. And those factors include whether the cities or localities identified themselves as sanctuary jurisdictions, how much they complied already with federal officials enforcing immigration laws, if they had restrictions on sharing information with immigration enforcement, or had any legal protections for people in the country illegally. The list was subsequently removed on June 1st, but it seems that it may remain in effect and is still being updated. And the potential consequences for being on the list include suspension or termination of federal funding and potential litigation from the federal government. So prior to the removal of the list, DHS had indicated that it was working with jurisdictions seeking their removal from the list and had invited jurisdictions to reach out directly via an email that had been provided and to provide additional information that could affect a jurisdiction inclusion on the list, which would be reviewed as part of DHS's ongoing updates to that list. But there was really no indication given of how a jurisdiction might demonstrate that it is not a sanctuary jurisdiction or take other steps to not remain a sanctuary jurisdiction. There have been a few examples of counties that were taken off the list before it was removed. In particular, I know Weld County was removed by reaching out to their federal congressional representatives. And they did issue a media statement, which indicated that the county did not receive any formal notification of any noncompliance with federal statutes. The county had never considered or declared itself a sanctuary county for purposes of protecting illegal migrants. And they did, Weld County does have a code provision that they referenced, which provides basically that no appropriations would be used for the specific purpose of providing emergency shelter for illegal immigrants. That's the one most specific example I have, but I know other counties have been removed, and I don't know if you have specifics about what La Plata did. So thinking through those kind of examples and the factors that we are aware of, I have some ideas about how we might make the case for removal from the list if that's something the commissioners want to pursue. San Diego County has never declared or designated itself as a sanctuary jurisdiction. To my knowledge, we don't have any legal protections for undocumented immigrants outside of state law. We don't have any restrictions on sharing information with immigration officials outside of state law. Colorado law does prevent local law enforcement from enforcing federal immigration laws. In particular, we can't hold an inmate for ICE beyond their scheduled release date. And we cannot arrest someone based solely on their immigration status. And there's a number of other limitations. I did speak with Sheriff Cobalt about this just to get a better sense of, his position on this and what actions have been taken in terms of cooperation or information sharing with ICE or other federal officials. And he indicated to me that, the sheriff's office operates within the confines of state law. That's what they are tasked with upholding. They do not assist ICE, but they're also not obstructing federal law enforcement. They do provide limited information to ICE within the confines of state law. And they would consider providing assistance to federal law enforcement if it were a matter of officer safety and support. For instance, involving a dangerous criminal. And the sheriff's position is that the department will enforce the law against all criminals, regardless of their immigration status. And I do know there was at least one example where an undocumented person was arrested outside of the San Miguel County Jail in February. And that was facilitated based on the fact that there was a civil detainer that ICE had for that person, and there is a notification procedure in place for if someone does have a civil detainer. So I think that's an example of where the county has facilitated within the confines of the law and not obstructed federal law enforcement.
I've had a number of conversations with first Sheriff Masters and then with Sheriff Cobalt about exactly this, like how do we or do we not, cooperate, if you will, with ICE. And there are, I don't know if Dan described to you the IHQ system. I think that I may have it wrong, but it's a Homeland Security system where when we arrest anybody, we have to ask them certain information, including where their place of birth is. And if it's outside of the United States, we have to run them through the ICE system. And that's how the ICE office would be notified of somebody in the jail, basically. And so we do comply with that, absolutely. We will only hold a person if they have a judicial warrant. The ICE would come if they had a civil warrant, but as you already described, per state law, we won't hold them waiting for ICE to come with a civil warrant, only with the judicial warrant. So we are and he said the same thing to me, that
If ICE should require sort of any kind of, peacekeeping services while they're here, in order to keep both the federal agents and our public safe, that they would provide those, but that they would not actually do federal immigration enforcement themselves, which again is very much in line with Colorado law. So I think we have a very strong case for not being a sanctuary county. It's just a question of, we've never received any notification from DHS, have we?
No,
No.
not to my knowledge.
Nothing from the federal government. So the question is.
And that was in the listing on their website that was removed. And I did look it up while we were sitting here. It says that though the website has been taken down due to backlash, Department of Homeland Security continues to have this list, but it does say, both from our Attorney General as well as on the website before it was taken down, that they will provide a list of the policies or actions that each jurisdiction has taken that they consider to be in violation of the executive order. And we have not received that. Likewise, the email that Maura was speaking about, I have not seen or received an email that would say where we try and make our case. We did, obviously, when we learned about this, we shared immediately, we were in a meeting with Congressman Hurd and shared that all the same information, not to this level, but that we did not ever take a policy stance and have not created policies that we believe would be in violation of any of the federal law.
And my understanding too is that as Colorado has developed these laws around immigration enforcement, that they've been very thoughtful to not have them be in conflict with federal law. So that was the case for 267 that just passed. Like, they were being very deliberate about that, which is why it took a really long time to develop. But I feel, my understanding is that none of the Colorado laws that we follow are in conflict with federal law.
And just to keep in mind, we were listed with 40 other counties. And we learned at the CCI conference, some of those counties that have been named, they believe it was because they had passed resolutions declaring themselves Second Amendment sanctuary counties, to try and further reinforce the protection of the right to bear arms for their citizens. And they were somewhat outraged that they were on that list as well. So I think this is not a liberal or progressive versus conservative county thing. This is perhaps maybe a misuse of AI in combing things for specific keywords. That was the suspicion shared by others at CCI. But I think until we receive any sort of notice from Homeland Security, this isn't something that is really of grave concern to me, because I think we would need to understand where they think we're in violation so that we could appropriately respond versus trying to just build a case based off of what we think makes us not a sanctuary county. So that's kind of my plea is I don't want to see Maura or other folks spending extensive time until we are able to receive something that would be the notice that would give us that opportunity to make a case.
Do we have any idea why? I can imagine why Weld wanted off that list, because they are a fairly conservative county and probably wouldn't want to be mischaracterized as anything remotely sanctuary. But do we have any idea why La Plata County wanted to get off the list? I'm just wondering what their motivation was. I haven't been in touch with them.
I don't know exactly, but I know a number of including Lake County pursued removal from the list. I don't know if they actually were removed, but I imagine it's because of the arbitrary consequences that may come with being on the list.
If I may, I would assume there are counties who are trying to be proactive because they may be even more reliant on federal funding than our county tends to be. It's not to say that we don't really appreciate and need our federal funding resources. But there are other counties that are in more precarious financial situations, and they may be just playing a little bit of proactive defense against these considerations. And I just note that per NACO's, statements, there still has yet to be a single county of the 400 that were originally listed in that who have received a notice of why they were on that list. And so nobody has notified the National Association, oh yeah, I got one of those letters and they told us why we were included on the list. So, for my part, I would echo what Mike says. I don't think it's prudent to pursue work that we don't know is needed right now. We aren't feeling any backlash. I think we haven't been run into any issues with federal funding so far. I think of the last one we signed was the airport agreement for the airport authority to receive some federal funding. Ramona has not indicated to us in our meetings this week that federal funds are being withheld by any means. And so I would encourage that we don't chase a solution in search of the problem quite yet.
I would only add, I've looked on the Center for Immigration Studies map of sanctuary cities, counties, and states multiple times over the last few years. And it does list Colorado as a state they consider to be a sanctuary state, along with numerous others. But when you get into the counties listed in each state, there are no counties listed in their evaluation of counties that have declared themselves a sanctuary county.
The federal funding potential loss, Maura, would that be only for the county government, or could it potentially be for other entities just located in the county? Do you have any sense of that? Because yes, we haven't had any big ramifications, but I know like Eco Action Partners and San Miguel Resource Center, they have lost some federal funding, and I just want to make sure it's not.
That was prior to the publication of this list, but Eco Action lost that funding, and other similar environmentally minded organizations across the state also had similar cuts. So I don't think we have enough information that we're going to know that in.
Well, I understand that, but I'm just wondering if we would be making them more vulnerable by not fighting this. But I also hear what you're saying, is like, we don't have anything to fight that.
I mean, to the extent we could predict what this administration might do, I would read the executive order and the list and anything else I've seen come out about this, that it would be targeted to those jurisdictions that are on the list.
Okay.
But you never know.
If they're projecting our sanctuary status across our citizenry,
Yeah.
I think it would be a really tenuous position for the federal government to be pursuing, because again, they're the ones who've signed contracts to provide these resources. And I assume that they retracted those resources through the legal process as well.
Commissioners, do you have any objections to following Mike and Jared's suggested course on this list?
I don't at this point. I think if we get any indication that there's any funding that might be affected, then that's when we pursue or we get that directive or that letter from NACO outlining what we're in violation of.
Or be from the federal government?
From the federal
Well,
government.
from the federal government, but
Yeah.
that NACO is asking for. I
Thank
think
you.
that would be a trigger, but at this point, I think it's very sensible.
I agree. Commissioner Brown?
I would just say, let's just keep our ear to the ground, because if suddenly there is an opportunity to defend ourselves and get us off that list, I would want to be at the top of the line as quickly as we can. So I don't want to be caught off guard. That's all.
Yeah.
But I think this is really helpful, Maura. Thank you for
you know, doing that background research for us and giving us something to really chew on and think about. And I would just say, agree with the other commissioners, we don't need to do anything at this time, except just kind of all of us keep our ear to the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think if we hear anything about action being taken based on the list, even though the list is not posted,
Visible
we can,
list.
I do have the email address that we can make our case to. Whether they'll respond to anything, yeah.
And I think we've already talked through our case, right? I mean, obviously you go into more detail, but I feel like we're in a good spot right now. All right. Anything else from Attorney Matters? No?
That's all I have.
Anything else generally? Okay. What do you say, Lance?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
How do you vote?
Aye.
Aye.
As well. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. We will see you next week.